This episode is brought to you by Ardan Labs Education. Sign up today to learn advanced concepts in Go, Docker, Kubernetes, Terraform, and more. Visit ardanlabs.com/education for more information.
Welcome to the Ardan Labs podcast. Our special guest today is Colby Fayock. Colby, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey man, where are you coming from?
I'm west outside of the Philadelphia area, so around Westchester if you're familiar, but usually I try to go pretty broad and then narrow in if people know the area.
I think that's smart because even though I grew up on the island of Long, I think I went to Philadelphia once. And my sister lives in some remote town like an hour from the airport. I don't know, dude. So yeah, I don't know that area. I know the Poconos. I was forced as a kid to go to the Poconos like every year.
Popular travel destination.
I really didn't get it. And the skiing there is horrible too. So now here I am just hurting Colby's state. So I apologize for that. But yes, I have a good sense of where you are. Cool. Why don't you give everybody a couple of minutes of your background and what you're doing today?
Sure. So I'll start off with what I'm doing now. I'm a developer experience engineer at Cloudinary, which is a media management and delivery platform. I do things like content creation, build integrations, proofs of concepts, so a lot of code-based things to help teach people basically tools of the web, but also Cloudinary within that context, right? My background is engineering and UX design. So prior to this, I was a lead UX and front-end engineer at a small software company. I did some fun projects like a video streaming site and built satellite mapping dashboards, which I had a lot of fun with. But a lot of stuff, it kind of led me to wanting to teach to help maximize my impact, and that's where I am today.
So I am not a front-end developer. I'm not even allowed to talk to the designers. Like this is the only time I get to talk to Eric, actually. That's how bad I am with front-end. But I'm constantly struggling with what's the latest tech that everybody should be using right now for building front ends.
So it's definitely different depending on who you talk to, because there's some really the great thing is there's a lot of awesome tools. Yeah, also, the bad thing is there's a lot of different tools. So you have a lot, almost too many options. But I'm a big React fan. So within that world, Next.js is pretty much the leader. It has a huge hold of the market for front end tooling. But then you have some other tools like Svelte, which is a little bit different for how it's actually approaching building the web app inside the browser, shipping less JavaScript, those kind of things, and other newcomers on their way. But generally speaking, I like to stick to React. I'm a big fan of it, and have been using that for a long time.
Have you done any mobile development with any of these tools? Like I keep hearing Flutter. I actually wouldn't mind learning it, but I'm not a front end guy.
I've never done any mobile development. I've built mobile web experiences, but that's a different beast, right? But I've never done any native development.
This is a podcast about you, and we're going to get to kind of where you're at today, but I want to kind of hear that journey. So just to kind of set some time frames here, Colby, especially since you grew up in the U.S., what year did you graduate high school?
Sure. I graduated high school in 2006 from the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania.
So that means you had about 50 people in your high school?
That's, I think it was about 70, but yeah, that's about accurate. Yeah. Very, very small school.
So I had 300 kids, which was really small for Long Island.
Okay.
But where I went up to school in upstate New York, I went all the way up, like Potsdam. I met kids that had like 30 people in there, and not just from like elementary to middle school. Like there weren't enough kids to even change schools, right? Like you lived with these kids, which has to be incredibly difficult, I think, at some level, because especially as you turn into a teenager and you get into those dating years, like everybody's dated everybody already, right? So it's like, does the school go crazy when somebody new suddenly like comes into the school? It's like,
yeah, no, it's interesting, especially like I wasn't in a school with, I had multiple teachers, of course, since I was at that number of students that it permitted that, but can only imagine that if it's a 30 person school? Like, do they just have the same teachers for every single subject throughout the? Well, I have to imagine they would move, but it would be the same class, right? Like the entire class shifts to the. So do the teachers come to them to make it easier?
Dude, I don't know. Even at 300 students, I kind of knew everybody in my grade. I guess that was 300 in my grade, not even the whole school. Now that I'm talking about it, I kind of knew everybody. I didn't have like close relationships with everybody, but I knew everybody, even at 300, right? So, okay, so during those high school years, those are those formative years, right? That's when you're starting to kind of figure out what you're into, what you're not into. What were you focusing on from the time you're like 14 through 17? Did you already have some sort of core interest and an idea of what you wanted to do in life?
To be honest, not really. I think I originally wanted to be a chef. So I was looking into, like, when you have to write your paper about what you want to do, it was about like trying to explore that area. And I don't know why, like I'm not really even interested now in doing like in cooking or anything. But that whole time on the side, I love to play PC games. I was a big Counter-Strike and Warcraft 3 fan. But what I would do on my side time is build team websites, and I would also customize MySpace profiles. So there was totally a seed in there of what I wanted to do. I just didn't kind of know that that's what I wanted to do. But I was really attracted to the design side of that too, from a hobby perspective. And that's what eventually I tried to go to school for.
But you were using MySpace to build out those websites in 2006?
So that was kind of where it started, because you can kind of, I'm not sure if you were familiar, but you were able to add HTML, you were able to add CSS. So by being able to do that, you could really customize the page to whatever you want, because you can add that HTML and then use CSS to move it around the page, where you could just do a simple theme, change some colors or text colors, but you can also take a div, like an HTML div, and overlap it onto the entire website, covering up the entire MySpace part of it, and create whatever you want.
You're like, I want to just whitewash this, and then I'm going to do what I. That's pretty wild, dude. So, did you have an artistic kind of background before you started with the websites? Can you draw and all that, or you didn't even have that? You just enjoyed kind of building.
Yeah, I'm not artistic at all. I'm sure I drew a little bit when I was growing up, like as a kid, as most kids do, but I've never considered myself an illustrator. I don't think I draw very well. I still try to do what is it, Inktober every once in a while, if you're familiar. I try to just improve a little bit. It's one of those. It's kind of like Hacktoberfest, but it's for illustrators, where every day there's a different prompt as to what to draw. So then you just create every day a different drawing, and just to kind of practice to maybe improve a little bit. But it never helps, because I'm still an awful illustrator.
Inktober. I have never. Eric, have you ever heard of Inked? Eric's shaking his. Have you ever participated in Inktober? Oh, Eric has. Eric's an amazing artist, like amazing with the stuff that he can do. So I'm not surprised that he's heard of it. I've never heard of it. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, because the prompts are completely random, and you can really draw whatever you want. The whole goal is to just kind of push yourself to draw a little bit, and I can see progress over time, that it's a little bit better, but it's still nothing you'd probably want to put up on a wall.
See, I'm the person who believes that either you have it in you to be able to really draw, or you don't. Like I just don't think like anybody can turn me into an artist. Like I just don't have the brain, the eyes, the feel. I don't know what it is. My sister's amazing, dude. And she does makeup artist stuff too. Like absolutely amazing. She got that gene. I didn't get it. Do you feel like anybody could become a really strong, say, illustrator or drawer, or do you feel like I do? It kind of has to be part of your DNA.
So I think that there's a little bit of an inherent natural ability. Whether that comes from something throughout your life or not is, a bigger question. But I definitely think most people can get to that. It's just, it takes a lot of practice, right? And do you have the motivation to do that practice? I don't have that motivation. And like, I don't, like, I'd love to see myself get better at drawing, but I'm not good. I don't have the motivation to practice every single day. So I'm not going to do that. So I'm likely never going to be able to be a better drawer.
No, I love that answer, because when people tell me they don't have time to do something, I'm always like, no, you have all the time in the world to do the things you want to put attention to, right? You just don't want to put any attention to this. And that's kind of what you're saying. So that's fair. You're building out these websites, I'm imagining, for yourself and your friends as you're gaming. So you're putting sort of like what, stats and these types of things up on the website so you can brag about how you're beating everybody.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Imagine like a sports team site, right? Like I have the roster, I have like screenshots, I have little profiles for everybody, so you can talk about what your PC setup is like. It was a lot of fun. It was something that wasn't strictly necessary, but I had a lot of fun doing it, and it was just something I would do whenever I was on a team. But it was something I could show people, and it kind of inspired me to this path.
But are you doing anything else in high school? Are you playing any sports? You're doing any music? Are you doing anything else, or it's basically schoolwork, friends, gaming, and this fun stuff you're doing?
Yeah, I dabbled in some different sports here and there, but nothing that I was very like super wholehearted in. I back in middle school, I was in like band and chorus, but I didn't continue that in high school. But I did have a band. It was just some friends of mine that we created a few songs. I thought they were pretty good, but after everybody left for college and stuff, it kind of fizzled out. But it was fun while it lasted. I played the guitar, the electric guitar.
Did you guys get to play any concerts or anything in front of your peers?
Yeah, a couple. We played one at the local park that was this like a little charity thing that somebody from high school set up, and then we played my other friend's graduation party in his basement, and that was fun too. So I wouldn't say concerts, but they're gigs, right?
Dude, you were living the rock star lifestyle, man, in high school. Look at you. I need some pictures of you now on stage with the long hair. I know you had long hair. You can't be playing guitar with
I
short
did have
hair.
long hair. I did. That was, definitely longer than it was. It got the longest in college. But yeah, I did have long hair.
Oh, dude, we got to get some pictures. We got to get some soundtrack of Colby like just thrashing on the guitar, man. Nice, dude. Nice. That's cool. As you become a senior in high school, you got to start figuring out what your next steps are. So a few questions there I want you to kind of think about. Was college like an automatic thing for you, or did you have some other ideas? What kind of pressure or non-pressure were your parents maybe putting on you for? I put a lot of pressure on my boys to get out of the house when they like were actually all the kids, okay? Like, you're out of the house. That's it. You got to go start living your life, right? Like, didn't mean I was abandoning them. It just meant like start your life. So I'm kind of curious where you're at when you're a senior about what your next steps are and kind of where your family's maybe pushing you.
Sure. I always knew that I wanted to go to college. I'm fortunate and privileged to had that opportunity. But so like, because I always knew I wanted to go, like I didn't really need that extra like push from my parents to do that. But that said, like I think the biggest thing was where I wanted to go. Like I applied to a small school in Pennsylvania. I ended up going to Penn-State main campus and enjoyed my time there, football and
All right. You just said you applied to a small school and you ended up in Penn State.
yeah.
A Nittany Lion, right?
Yes, a Nittany Lion.
Nice, dude. And their football program, at least the last couple of years, they've been coming back. I'm a big college football fan. So
Are you okay? I'm not gonna lie. These last couple of years, I don't know if so. I recently had a kid too, and I'm sure we'll get there in the journey. But like, I don't know. Between the pandemic and having a kid, I've just lost interest, and I haven't been able to get myself back. But I used to love going to the games. So much fun, so much energy in college football games, and I'm sure at some point I'll get back to that, especially as my kid grows up. But
bring it back, man. Saturday, and it just started, man. There's so much. Like I did too. When I started having my kids, I kind of let it go, and now I'm back again, but I'm really sad that I did. I'm really sad that I didn't make the attention on Saturdays, at least to watch that game. Like
right.
You should have the Penn State, no matter what. Like those 4 hours with the kids, fine, but don't lose that. That's some advice I'm going to give you now as a 52-year-old man here.
Then one day I hope to be able to take them to the games and stuff because that's what my dad did, and I really enjoyed those times.
Oh, so you end up in Penn State. Do you already have an idea of what you want to major in at that point, or you're gonna try to figure it out?
Yeah, so with all that work that I was doing, well, quote work that I was doing in high school, I ended up going for design. Tried to go into the graphic design program because I knew I wanted to do design. I did some of that little coding on the side, but I didn't know that that's what I wanted to do. But also, they didn't really have at that time like a coding program. Like they had the what is it, computer science, but that wasn't really like website stuff at that point, right? Like it, that was still like a developing topic for education. So I didn't really have something like that. So it was for me like that kind of just all came on the side. But so ultimately, yeah, graphic design. Um, I get there. The first 2 years are kind of like the introductory. You start building up to it, but then after the first 2 years, you were supposed to apply to the program. And I'm not going to lie, my college work ethic probably wasn't the best, and I didn't make it into the program. So I had to kind of switch gears there a little bit, and I ended up doing the last 2 years in photography, which I think helped balance out. Uh, it gave me some knowledge about being able to work with photography in my work, but overall, like it's not something that I use in my day to day.
Okay, that's all. Okay. That's kind of interesting because you're not really interested in a computer science degree. You're not looking to become a programmer in that traditional sense, but you love programming the websites. You loved programming that sort of UI, right? I mean, it's programming at the end of the day, but a traditional computer science program isn't going to really teach HTML and that kind of stuff. But Penn State, that track that you were on, right, before you went into the photography, was that more like artsy stuff, or were they teaching HTML and CSS and JavaScript and all that?
So at that point, they weren't teaching that at all. Like I know I took one, I think it was called like New Media or something, a class, and they taught you some Flash stuff. But they didn't really get too much into like, where they didn't get anything into JavaScript or anything like that. It was really just trying to create little things in Flash, and I don't think they even got to the code aspect. It was really just the editor and such. But yeah, anything that I did that was code based was all just on the side. I think they kind of recommended thinking about it from a portfolio perspective and not even like learning to code. It was more so, oh, you should have a web portfolio and you should go figure out how to do that, as opposed to like teaching you how to do that, right?
So I'm really confused that you went to this school when they didn't really have that thing that you were interested in, unless in your brain it was just like, no school's going to have this anyway, and I want the 4-year degree, so I'm just going to go do this. And is that kind of what happened?
So I don't think I knew at that time that that's what I wanted to do. Like I don't think in my brain it was even registering that that was an opportunity that I could pursue and that I enjoyed enough to pursue. So in my mind, like I wanted to do design. I wanted to come out of school as a graphic designer and work on graphic design stuff. So that's kind of where my mindset was at that time.
But now, as you was there anything else in college that you were kind of interested in that you were doing? Was there anything more social other than the football games, which is kind of cool?
Yeah, I wouldn't say so. It was just the typical college student stuff, hanging out with friends and finding interest. But yeah, I wouldn't say that there was anything out of the ordinary for who I was.
Dude, I wanted you to say I picked up the guitar again and we thrashed for another year.
Man, yeah, the bad news is like my guitar career kind of went down. I had always tried to play with friends when we would go back and visit at home but that didn't, unfortunately, it didn't keep up with it. And even now, like I rarely touch it. I want to get back into it again for my kid to make sure that like, I can play for him and teach him and stuff, but it's one of those things.
As you're now about to graduate, what is the degree you're going to end up with? It's going to be a BA in...
It's called the way they called it was integrative arts, and basically what that means is that you could combine different types of so like I combine graphic design and photography, and I'm sure there were other topics that you could combine into this integrative arts thing, but that's ultimately what I ended up with.
It's interesting to me because as you're leaving university, I guess you're undergraduate. Are you thinking graduate school, or are you thinking I want to get into industry?
I'm definitely not at that point thinking about graduate school, um, at least in a serious perspective. Like, I always thought, is that something like I thought about in the back of my mind, is that something I want to do to hopefully, set myself up better for my career? But I didn't really find there was never really an obvious path for me there as to what I would go. I didn't want to go just to go. Nothing really stood out to me as something that I wanted to pursue. So after school, it took me probably 8 months until I found my first role. But my first role was working for a small, what was it, an e-marketing company. So I was doing little designs for graphic banners and things like that, just like little design things on the computer for their email marketing and their websites. Had a lot of fun with that, and there was a lot to learn, especially with like email. And I actually was able to dip my toes into code a little bit, because with the email and just little random things, like I was kind of learning on the job to just kind of create more opportunities for what I was doing.
Were you working at all while you were in university? Was there any even sort of internships or anything there?
I didn't have any internships. I worked as a customer service rep for like 2 years just for some side money, but um, nothing. I wasn't working. Nothing that was for my career, and I kind of regret that. I'm happy with where I am, but I do wonder if that would have set me up for more success.
And for the 8 months that you were struggling to find, this is 2010, right?
Yeah, yep, 2010.
Which was a difficult time because 2008 is when everything kind of crashed and the economy's kind of recovering at that point. So yeah, I mean, it was going to take a little bit. What were you doing for those 8 months? Were you just
I was living at my mom's house. I don't think I was really doing particularly anything aside from maybe trying to find side work, but like I didn't really. I'm not the kind of person that likes to go hustle and find new client work. So it was really like maybe for my mom's business, I was able to create a website, or for my sister-in-law, those kind of things. But it's just like little freelance things I could do on the side. But it was really just trying to, like, most of my time was dedicated to trying to find a job. And like I spread out the word of Colby Fayock as much as I could, and it took a little bit of time to find something that eventually clicked.
were you just looking in your town, or were you willing to, like, let's say a job popped up in Philadelphia? I mean, were you willing to move? Were you at least expanding kind of your search?
Totally, yeah. I think I had areas where I would be willing to move as opposed to not willing to move. I can't remember exactly what those areas were, but like I definitely expanded it quite a bit. Like I was on Monster at that point because like I was getting like the way that I kind of first approached it was trying to find companies that I wanted to work for and apply for those, and then that was not really working out. So then I started to widen my search, and then eventually it was Monster and just trying to find any opportunity that I could, because it was taking so much time. And I was happy where I was at for my first job, but it was part of that process of kind of just doing a spray of sending my resume anywhere it could. Now thinking about it like back after like the years, I know people always say like you should take more time for each individual cover letter and resume you send. So maybe I could have done that better, and maybe that would have resulted in better experience. But the way that I did it, it took a bit of time before something actually picked up.
Now, how long were you at this first job? How long did you stay there?
I think it was either like 6 months to a year, but the only reason that I left there early is because it was only a part-time job at that point. So I, of course, was trying to look for a full-time opportunity, and once I found something that I got an offer for, I tried to present that, but they just weren't looking to bring somebody on full-time at the time. So at that point is when I made the switch.
So, okay, so that was a part-time job. So you were still kind of looking to find that next full-time gig. And what did you end up? Who ended up deciding to hire Colby next?
So it's funny. I actually regressed in my journey of web development, and I went to a a large format print company, and what I mean by that is they did a lot of advertising, and their specialty was wrapping cars and trucks. So if you're driving down the highway and you see a giant truck with the big banner on the side, that's the kind of designs I was doing, or trying to fit little design elements on a car. And it was a lot of fun. It was challenging, and like I could do a lot of creative work with that. You know, ultimately that's not what I wanted to do for a career, but like it was a fun job and really helped me explore that creativity.
What software are they using for that? And was that work then sent to printing shops, or they even had their own sort of printing shop there?
So they had their in they own the end-to-end process. So I think usually I would use Photoshop or Illustrator, and then we would prep the design files for the printers, which we had the printers in house. So that includes like adding the little crop things and all that stuff, making sure that it was set up properly for them to print it. But they would print it, and they also had the people doing the actual installation. So that includes taking the big vinyl sheets and actually wrapping the vehicles with them.
All I ever remember about, like that printing industry's kind of dead. I still see cars that are wrapped and stuff, even buses. But I always remember that one of the biggest challenges, especially if you wanted to reuse the design on a website, was color, right? Because you had one color system for the computer and you have another coloring system for print, and they didn't always kind of match up, right?
Yeah, totally. And like one of the biggest challenges for me was if I was working with one of my managers and they were looking at these designs and they see it on the computer, it's like, oh, this color might look really bright and vibrant on the computer, but then translating that to the different color profile, where of course, like if you start in that profile, you might have a little bit easier time translating that. But I was learning on the job. But moving that over to the print, like it could look completely different and much more dull. So there was a mixture between me trying to overcompensate for colors, but also the printer was able to do some of that on their own based off of their experience with building those color systems. So it was interesting. Like it's not something I directly use today, but I feel like there was a ton of little things that I learned on that job that helped just indirectly apply to the things that I do.
But this still isn't the job that you want. And you're landing into these jobs primarily at this point because of your background and your ability to design that kind of stuff. What's going on in your heart? Because you're going to work every day. How long were you at this company as well?
So that one was about a year as well. And it was because I eventually found a new opportunity. But one of the cool things about it is, so on the side, like I would do some of my own little coding projects, like just trying to learn things. Like I remember I tried to learn how to do like WordPress themes because that was kind of an easy entry into that during that time, and trying to work with a friend who was helping teach me how to write PHP, even outside of the WordPress context. But those were all just things on the side that I was interested in doing because as a hobby. But the company was cool that they wanted to rebuild their website, and originally they were going to contract that out, but I kind of pitched them, what if I made that for them? And I ended up being able to create their new website on the job, so that gave me a little bit more actual web development experience, even though it wasn't like technically part of the job, right?
Now, okay, was that extra hours that you had to put in, or did they incorporate that into like you stopped doing some wrapping design work to work on the website?
If I remember correctly, the majority of it was on the side. Like they paid me extra to do that, kind of like a contractor. But I think I still did some of the work on the time. Like it just depended on the day. Like if they wanted to come in and talk about the website, maybe we would sit there and work on it for a little bit. But ultimately, like it would be extra hours that they were able to pay me for.
Okay, so this is like 2011. So, right, about 2011. So what technology are you using for this site, and how are you hosting it?
Yeah, so I believe that was a WordPress site. I was using DreamHost at the time, which it was, a standard web server company that I was able to get up and running pretty easily. It's what I was using for my own little pet pop project, so it was easy to get up and running. But yeah, that's,
WordPress.
I don't know. Yeah, WordPress.
I remember that tech back in the day too, because It was at a time, even when I was in corporate, where the marketing departments were being, for lack of a better word, pain in the ass about the velocity they wanted to move at. And to the point where even like the dev shops I were in, we were just saying, fine, you own the marketing site. You own the marketing site. Like we don't want to deal with it anymore. And so like WordPress is a content management system in a sense, right? Allowed these companies to make changes. Whether that was good or bad is another story, but make changes very quickly on the fly. So I saw a lot of that tech, especially back then. I don't know how many people are using it like that today. I don't even know what's out there in the landscape for.
Yeah, at this point, there's a big movement in decoupling the content management system from the front end, so that somebody could use something like React with whatever content management system they use. So they would hit it with an API and bring it in, kind of like you'd probably see in a more traditional, like maybe homebrewed content management system. But WordPress is capable of doing that as well. But with that expanding market, there's a ton of different headless CMS options that have grown out of that need.
We have pretty much just a static website. So we use a framework named Hugo, which was written in Go by Steve Francia, and it's worked for us, right? Like I think sometimes people forget that sometimes you just need a static. In fact, I had a friend recently saying, "Bill, I just want a static website. All these frameworks are so complicated." And I was like, "Dude, just turn on." There's like a load balancer web server called Caddy. I said, dude, just turn Caddy on and write some HTML pages and tell Caddy what the URLs are, and you're like done, dude. And he's like, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like we tend to forget that you can still just write a basic HTML file, like if you don't need all those strict requirements, right? But yeah, no, I've heard of Hugo. I've heard great things. I've just never used it before.
Yeah, I mean, it can get sometimes you get down in the weeds in it if you're trying to do. But like I said, it's just 9 times out of 10, that's all you need. And it's simpler to edit an HTML file than it is to kind of log into a CMS. So what I'm kind of curious is while you're at this second company and you're building out their website and you're enjoying that work and you're learning, how is the next opportunity presenting itself? Are you out there going to, I don't know if there were meetups back in 2011 or user groups or like, where is the next opportunity coming from?
Yeah, it's still just for me, it was still just the standard job search. Like, I don't think I knew enough about that uh, community to even think about meetups being a thing that I could look for. So really, it was just looking for job postings for something, and like I could have totally just stayed where I was at, but it wasn't going to be something that was going to help my career. Like there wasn't any kind of career development in that role, and honestly, of course, I didn't want to do that. Like at that point, I kind of knew I wanted to do web development because of all that kind of side work I was doing. So I did want to find a web development job. And at one point, I was able to find a little startup in Pittsburgh, which is where I was living at that time, that was doing event ticketing software called ShowClicks. And I found a web designer and developer role uh, that they picked me up for.
See, that's brilliant. You must have been super excited when you got that job because now
Yeah.
you got to work on this. What was their, not that you cared at the time because you didn't, but what was their tech stack going into that?
It was PHP based, which, my limited experience with PHP helped me at least be able to navigate things a little bit. Like at that point, I was still just very, 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 like, not even what you would consider front end today, right? It was really more the web design and like really basic HTML. And like if there was any JavaScript, it would be like something that I would copy and paste or use from Dreamweaver. But like I was still just dipping my toes in the actual code itself. But it was a PHP stack. I know they had some kind of like custom, I think it was a custom MVC setup. So I don't remember if there was any specific frameworks that they used, but the nice thing about that role is I was able to, like, one of the engineers there kind of like took me under his wing and was really supportive with helping me learn these things. Because I think also because I kind of showed the initiative that I wanted to learn these things and become more productive, both in a sense of my role, but being able to help the team do more effective things. So I was fortunate to have somebody like that as a team that helped me learn and grow.
See, because I was going to ask, why do you think they hired you? Because technically you didn't have the full level of experience. In fact, did you think that going into sending your resume in? Did you think, you know what, I don't have a chance for this, but I'm just going to kind of do it anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like, I think if I remember correctly, it was still a little bit leaning more towards the design side. And at that point, like, I had like my entry level design chops, and I was able to be productive in the standpoint, because I think the original kind of intent of the job was to do very basic HTML. And one of the things that they had me do was, so each event would have their own event page. So one of the things customers like to do is customize the event page. So that might be a simple banner, but it might also be like a fancy background and things like that. But so that was from like the design perspective, right? But maybe if there was a development project, maybe I would just create a simple landing page that people were able to see events. So an example of that is for Halloween or New Year's Eve, they would create these holiday specific landing pages where they would put little dots on a map of where all their events were, so that people could go there and visit and find one near to them, right? So I would build those kind of pages, and that's kind of where the code came in. Now, a lot of that was just copying and pasting code, but it's more basic things, right? It wasn't really diving deep into that PHP stack, and there wasn't that expectation. But I think just because of who I am and my interest and wanting to learn and grow, that's kind of what pushed me into learning more about PHP, about building websites, and how I could leverage that both in my role but for my career.
How big was that shop? Were there 5 of you? Were there 30 of you?
I want to say there was probably around 30 people, and a good amount of that was like the account managers and the CS team. So it wasn't a huge team.
All right. So, and how long did you stay at this company? Now we're talking about 2012, I think, right? You start this
Something
job.
like that,
So
yeah. But that one was another year. And like at this point, like I feel like I'm job hunting. Like if I look at my resume and see the amount of time I've spent at all these companies. But the issue with this company is, again, there wasn't really any growth opportunities. And I think I also kind of came into it underpaid, because I didn't have any expectation of what I was doing should have been making. So I gave a really low salary offer for when I tried to say what I was expecting to make when I took that offer. And it was, for me, it was still a progression as to what I was doing. But as I was learning more, I was growing as a developer and learning these things, and what I kind of around where I should be making, it was definitely low. And having that conversation, they weren't looking to make any adjustments at that time. So at that point, like, I tried to work with them to stay there, but it just kind of wasn't working out. And that's when I began to look again for a new role.
how quickly did you kind of identify that you were underpaid, and how did that come about? Or you knew immediately? And then how long was it before you started jumping on Monster again?
It took me a long time to kind of realize that it was underpaid. And I think there was kind of two aspects of that. One was, of course, just kind of learning the expectations, because I was still new in that role, right? So I was looking more on the design side of things as opposed to the development side of things. So like the salaries were a bit different. So one was learning the space and what people should be making in that space. But the other was the fact of where I entered that job and where I was at that point in time, the year later, and the responsibilities and the different work that I was doing that was way beyond the original expectations. So thinking about it from that perspective as well, is just I was doing far more than what they were paying me to do.
So you realize at that, so it's not that you didn't enjoy the work. You just came to the realization that you weren't going to grow in your career, I think both technically and financially at that point. You did everything you were going to kind of do. So you're coming up to that year and you jump on Monster again, or whatever the job board is for 2013. And then I'm really curious at this point, since you've got 3 jobs now over the span of 3 years of experience, how long does it take you to now, from the time you start searching, from the time you get hired, how long does it take you to move into this 4th job?
So I don't remember the exact timeline, but it was definitely much quicker than the other job searches. I did have a decent resume at this point. Like I did have experience on the job and what I was doing, and and a portfolio. Like one thing that I always made sure to do was maintain my work on my website, and have something to be able to show people, have something to talk about. And that was both from like a design and development perspective. I was still kind of pushing myself as both that designer and developer, and somewhat do today, not as much of the designer, but like I ultimately needed that portfolio, right? So I think being able to have all that work on my website both showed that I was able to understand the website and build that website, but also that I was able to present that work in a way that people could understand what I was capable of doing.
See, that's a little bit of forward thinking already, right? Because I mean, GitHub comes into play at around 2008, and that's kind of like now people's resume. And I tell this to everybody all the time. Go create some, on the engineering development side at least. Create a GitHub repo. Put as much stuff as you can in there. That way, people want to see your work, right? Like you're kind of a little bit ahead of the time because nobody was really thinking that, at least on the coding side, maybe on the design side.
Yeah, and like I think I kind of attribute that to my design path, because like part of being a designer is the visual work that you're doing, and they push you to create that portfolio. And having a web presence was like something that was highly recommended at the time, as that was a growing area, right? So having that design portfolio, and in my mind it translated to also including code based things that I could show. So whether that was a website I built, which was still more visual, but I can talk about the code based things that I was doing to help that aspect of the new role.
So, what is this next job you end up?
Sure. So the next one was a UX designer and front end developer at a company called ThinkGeek, which is a geeky e-commerce company, very niche, but I enjoyed my time there tremendously.
So, you were working on client projects at that point?
No, so they were an e-commerce company, and like ThinkGeek was the website. So imagine like Amazon, but way smaller. I mean, it was a very big company. They were eventually bought out by GameStop. They were just, they weren't small, but they also weren't like huge, huge, huge. But we worked primarily on the website, so that included things like working on product pages. How could we add features to better to make it more easy for people to work with it, wish lists, just simply adding the products, choosing different products, but also the checkout flow, so making it easier for people to give us money, right? So that includes like adding your billing information and shipping information, but also like aside from the joke about the money part, like that's also an experience that a lot of people get wrong. And how can we think about that from a UX perspective to make it easier for people, just out of the sense of they already want it, like how can we make it easier for them? But also there was the marketing side of it, where we would help create landing pages for different products and for promotional events. So it all encompassed the way that my role sat is we called it the UX team, where we kind of did both UX design and front end engineering, but we sat outside of the engineering team. We were kind of like in the middle of both engineering and marketing, where we kind of reported to both areas, but we weren't within the day-to-day agile of what the engineering team was doing.
That had to be really interesting, right? I mean, tell me a little bit
Very.
more about being in that space between these two. And I imagine that you're getting requests from two different sides, conflicting priorities. Like, how are you dealing with that? How are you managing that? Did it work? It didn't work? Why were you put there? Explore that a little bit more with me.
Yeah, so at times it was stressful, but I actually really enjoyed the position we were in because we had more flexibility to do things than either of the other teams did. And so, what I mean by that, so thinking about it first from an engineering perspective, they were very, very strict on the agile and Scrum regiments, right? So, like they had their planned work for the next 2 weeks, and they were very strict to make sure that happened. And totally fair. That's the process they had. But we weren't baked into that cycle, so we had more flexibility to do stuff. So if we had a project come up from marketing, or if there was something that we thought would be more effective, like we can spend their time where we think is the highest priority. Of course, unless it's like time restricted, right? But what that also meant is when dealing with code based things, kind of a throwback to that ShowClicks job, my last job, I wasn't specifically trained to work in the PHP at ShowClicks, right? And that was a similar process at ThinkGeek, where it was a Perl stack using something called Template Toolkit from the front end. But I wanted to do more than work in those templates. So I tried to learn how I could do little things in the Perl outside of that engineering scope so that we can still be productive. We can be creative with how we actually can build stuff and ultimately create better experiences for people outside of that engineering scope, which would have limited us from getting some of the work we did done.
I guess I'm a little confused because engineering is writing all that code. Wasn't engineering dependent on you for some of that 2-week sort of work they were doing? Did you have your own production sort of system and website where it didn't matter what engineering and the other groups were doing? You could move at your own velocity and publish at your own velocity?
Yeah, so we used Git, and like there was definitely the deployment processes, but I think the deployment process was like on an every 2-week cycle or something like that, unless something came up. So like we would basically fit it into that deployment cycle. But I think also at the same time, I think the templates were on a different cycle. It's hard to remember; it's been a long time since then. But I believe we were able to independently push some of our changes depending on what that code was. Like if it wasn't the Perl, I don't think we could make those changes. But if it was the templates, I think we were able to make those changes by being able to kind of like independently deploy them. But yeah, no, I like that's a good point. So like we were able to kind of sit outside of that engineering scope, which allowed us to be more productive and get things done.
This sounds like a larger shop than you've been in. So, and more important now too, because you're dealing with people's money. So the thought that pops in my head is you're pushing to production outside of engineering. Is there some formal QA process here? Or it was just, it worked at my desk, so let's move forward?
So it definitely depended on the thing. And I remember the first week that I was there. So aside from the templates and from the Perl, there was also a homegrown CMS that included like all the product stuff, all the inventory, all that, but also like a CMS for managing some of the content on the front end so that people can go in and edit things. Now, one of the things about that CMS is you can put some of that template code inside of the CMS, and that's how they achieve a lot of things like timed promotions where you have to show a specific banner until midnight happens, right? And then you need to flip it to the new promotion. And I definitely learned the hard way that in Template Toolkit, instead of else if separated by a space, it was else if ELSIF as one keyword. And I took down the site. And then I heard the QA person coming around the corner yelling UX, like because we broke the site, and eventually figured out what happened. But yeah, that definitely happened. We tried to use the QA process as much as we could, but I think because of the nature of the stuff we were doing, some of it we had to kind of just move fast and review our own work in our little pod as much as we could. But if it was bigger changes, especially as I moved into making changes to actual Perl, we were able to make sure we got more QA resources because typically that was reserved for the engineering team and that whole agile process.
So one of the first job I had in Miami, the guy that ran the entire operation had this like size 16 basketball shoe that he painted gold. It was called the Boot. And anytime somebody made a mistake that would bring down production or halt development or something, that person would have to write up what they did, put it in the boot, and they'd have the boot on their desk until the next person made a mistake. And I always incorporated this from that time on because there were times where I would just get up from my desk without saying anything, grab the boot, put it, and everybody would freeze and go, what did he do? And I wouldn't even say anything. And I would just put the boot on my desk. And the idea was that you didn't do that until you kind of fixed it, right? So the idea was you made a mistake, you fixed it. And the general idea was that if you didn't make at least, I said this to my teams basically, if you didn't get the boot at least once during this year, I'm going to question whether or not you're working or even trying.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Like I was really hard on myself about it the first time it happened. I'm like a week on a job, right? But I was, my team was very like understanding, and like they say like everybody takes down the site at least once. Like it's basically, what do they call it? It's
A rite of passage.
exactly. Yep.
You got the boot that day, my friend.
Yep. Yep.
Trust me, I used to get the boot at least 6 times a year. And most of the time I just got up, picked it up, and put it on my desk. That's kind of cool. Okay, so how long are you at this company?
So I was there for 3 years. So I finally found something that I enjoyed, and I was, because maybe it's because of the size of the company at that time. It wasn't a huge company, but like it was, I want to say it was like around 100, including like the big CS team and such. But like there was more of an opportunity for me to progress my career. So that includes both getting a promotion to getting the senior role at that point, and also being able to keep learning on the job, because I really found that work interesting. Like, and beyond the work, like the job was fun. I think because of how geeky the site was, because like we sold Star Wars stuff and Star Trek and like all those things, and like that bled into the work culture. Like people wanted to be there because they were having a fun with it, and they wanted to help people buy these really fun things. And so it was both a fun place to work, but I also really enjoyed the e-commerce perspective about it, because the problems that I was solving were really interesting to me.
But I'm curious if you were learning more and more Perl to do more work. Were they changing any of the tech over those 3 years?
They definitely didn't change the tech. Like it was still Perl, basically the same backend stack. But I was learning more and more JavaScript during that time. So we would rely more heavily on what we could do on the front end, and that included being very creative about what we were doing, because we were limited as to what we were able to do with the back end. But how could we take what we have and kind of repurpose it in ways that we can create a better experience for people? So a lot of the stuff that we ended up doing were creative ways to build new experiences for people in that manner.
That just reminded me of a really sad story I had this week where one of the guys that are doing some work for me, he's on the front end. I said to him, dude, why did you do these things that you did on the front end and not tell me what changes you needed on the back end? Because I tried to do a little bit of front end work and I realized what was missing and I made a bunch of changes. And I said, why didn't you do that? And he looked at me, he's like, Bill, back end, I can never get the back end guys to change anything. I've got to learn how to do with what I have. That's what I did. And I felt so sad. And I said, well, at least while you're working with me, your job is hard enough. Your job is hard enough on the front end. I don't want to make it harder. So for now on, you push back and you tell me. And he literally did that yesterday. He pushed back and he said, I need da, 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 da. And I started pushing and he said, no. And I said, okay, let's do it.
Well, it's great that you have that mentality to be able to like understand that, see that, and do what you can to help. But not all teams are able to do that. And I go back to that agile process, and I totally understand the agile process. That's great for helping predict what work you're doing and all that stuff. But because of that, and because of how rigid they were, we weren't ever able to fit things we wanted to do or things we needed to do into that life cycle. And again, because of the nature of the work that we were doing, both working with marketing in terms of promotions, and when we actually learned that we needed to do something, it would be too late to fit it into that cycle. So because of that, we never really had any runway to try to get that work scoped out in a timely manner that would make sense.
It's scary to me, right? Not all back-end systems exist for front-end systems, okay? But the back-end systems that exist primarily to feed a front end, that don't listen to the front-end developers and their needs, it's mind-blowing to me. Like, yes, you're going to guess initially what you think everybody needs, but I don't know, dude. That scares me. Like that, when he said that, I wanted to cry. I couldn't believe it.
The nice thing is, like, because like the more and more we did that work, like they eventually started to understand a little bit and were able to be a little bit more flexible, and we tried to think of ways we can prepare ourselves for the future. So one example is I completely rebuilt the mobile checkout, and to create a better experience, I was trying to think about what we would need from the back end and how could we create the best experience we can. And at that time, it wasn't really I wouldn't say popular. It wasn't really well established to use APIs, like public APIs that we could post to, at least for their system that they had. So one thing that we explored was how can they give us those the APIs that we could work with inside of the client and do the client side approach, which turned out to be a great experience. Now that was something new for them that they had to explore and figure out, of course, like the security issues around that to make sure that they weren't setting themselves up for failure. But, being able to have that more collaborative nature between the two teams, like really came out with something great.
Yeah. And now you have a code base that's cleaner and simpler and less code and more maintainable and all that. And I can't read front end code. As soon as you add a button to a screen, I'm done. I'm not good with event. If you saw this terminal UI I just built, it's literally like any event that happens, I just repaint the screen with information that I got. Like I tried to keep that as, I don't care how ugly that is. I didn't care. Just something happened, repaint. Something happened, repaint.
Hey, you got it done.
And it works, and I can maintain it like my mental models. But I'm fascinated by front end devs who can build these really kind of more than one button front ends with all the events that go on and maintain state.
Yeah. I think the benefit of front end is like how visual it is, right? Like you can immediately see those results, where I remember with the backend people, I don't know how they did it, because like every time they wanted to see something work, they had to like completely restart the server, right? That took so much time. Like every time they wrote the code, I was in my mind, how did they deal with that? Where all I had to do was refresh the page. But it's also amazing to see how far the web has come, and how much more productive we're able to be since those kind of times.
Well, what's interesting about this thing we're building is like you leverage on the back end side, you leverage tests as much as you can to get a sense even early on that things are working. I don't write tests first. I write the code first, and then I start leveraging tests to validate. But it wasn't until I started building a little bit of my own UI that I saw flaws in the web APIs, right? And so
that's a great point.
Maybe back-end devs need to try to consume their own APIs in one form or another.
Yeah, like if you think about it, like every part of the stack has a little bit of UX involved in it. And from a backend perspective, there's ultimately somebody who a person that has to use that backend API, right? And that could just be another developer on your team, but that's a person that needs to be able to use that. Or, that applies to like front end components. Somebody needs to use that front end component. So how can you make the UX, or we call it developer experience, DX of it? How can we make that experience as good as we can to make it easier for people to use?
So I say in all my trainings all the time, right? Especially if you're a Go developer, everything you do is building APIs. That's all you're doing. And so I ask people all the time, how many times have you ever used an API, regardless of web or not, that was so bad it just made you miserable? You didn't even want to go to work the next day because you knew you had to be in this miserable state, right? And now I say to everybody, think about that. And now understand that all you're doing all day is writing APIs. Every function you write is an API. And so you can either make somebody else's life great, where they're excited to come to work and work on this, or miserable. And you know what it feels like to be miserable. So think about what you're doing here.
So that reminds me, like when I was first doing the API, like trying to convince them of the APIs, most of the stuff they did was XML based. So like the first thought is XML based APIs, and thinking about it, I was only used to JSON based APIs at that point, and I was eventually able to convince them of why that's a better experience. But like it was painful using those XML based APIs, at least in my opinion.
Dude, I had a JSON based web API that returned XML once. It did something wrong. Oh my God! I felt so, like this is what I say all the time to the back end devs. You got to have a consistent error type that you send back, because you don't want front end devs having to write huge if statements depending on what API they're calling, and you have to make sure there's consistency there, right? Like,
and the like response numbers, right? Because the libraries we use on the front end, at least, like they recognize those different error types, and if you return the wrong response, like it's going to completely bypass a whole flow if you don't recognize that.
Yeah, and you just, the more if else somebody has to put into code, you're losing your ability to maintain and manage it over time. So you're here for 3 years. That's amazing. And then what happens?
So at that point in time, little bit of like frustrations on the job, just due to some of like mismanagement things, but also like I also felt like I was kind of stagnating in my role, where like I do feel like I learned a ton on that job, but I wanted to explore more. I wanted to do more things. So I started to look for a new role again, and I eventually came up with a company called Element 84, which is a small software small software shop, where the thing that really captured my attention with them wasn't that it was some big flashy thing, but they were doing some work that had like a um, effect on the world, where they do a lot of work with NASA, for instance, and I really like space stuff. So like I thought that would be a cool area to explore, and how could I help scientists do better things, right? So that captured me, and the work seemed really interesting from that regard. So that's where I went.
Now, this company also is in Pittsburgh. I mean, at this point, all these companies are still in Pittsburgh.
I haven't updated my location. So I moved down to Fairfax, Virginia, for the ThinkGeek role, because that's where they were headquarters. And then for this new role, they were located in Alexandria, Virginia. Now, where I lived, like, was around those areas. It didn't correspond directly, but the general vicinity.
See, I'm now. It makes sense that you're starting to get into a little bit of the aerospace because you're like that Virginia, Maryland, right
Yeah, right,
area is
exactly.
going to be there. So that's interesting. And you moved that. Was that move hard for you? Were you excited about that move when you went to the Think Geek or?
So that was an interesting time, because I took the job at ThinkGeek and declined a role actually in San Francisco with BitTorrent, which could have seemed really interesting, but I ended up going to the Virginia role because I had a few friends from high school that were living there. So it, like, honestly, I took the easy route, because I was afraid of moving to San Francisco all by myself, and especially like super expensive out there. So that was also scaring me. But ultimately, like I had a lot of fun with that role, right? So moving to Virginia ended up being the better route for me. But that made it really easy for me that I was able to move down there, and I had to stay in an Airbnb for a couple months, but then I was able to move in with my friends once the lease renewed, and um, start from there.
So that's interesting. I mean, I believe things happen for a reason. I left New York in 1994 and I came to Miami, and I love Miami. Okay, but sometimes I think back and think, well, if I had gone to San Francisco in '94, think about where I could have. Right, I think that could have potentially accelerated maybe a little bit more of my growth and the people I would have met. Right, because it's San Francisco, like right
Right.
ground zero. So do you ever think back and think, if I had gone to San Francisco and the opportunities there and the people I'd met there?
Like, absolutely, like I'm on the same page as you. I always think about that, like what if I would have taken that job and been in Silicon Valley, being able to like work with more of these startups and stuff. But being in the Virginia area is where I eventually met my wife, and like you said, I'm not really the kind of person who believes like in fate and all that stuff, but like it does kind of seem like it happened for a reason. Like I moved to Virginia and met my wife, and it went from there, right?
Yeah, no, things happen for a reason. So I don't second guess anything. But and hindsight's 2020, right? So it's interesting. You had an opportunity to be in San Francisco at a really good time. Actually, you're talking 2000. That was like 2013, right? I mean, it was a really good time to be there. So much startup activity going on, so much kind of cool tech. It would have been in '94. I don't think it was as cool as say, 2013. But so how long? So tell me again. Remind me again the name of this new company that you now.
Sure. The new company was called Element 84. And I just pulled up my resume because I wasn't sure about the dates, but that was January of 2017 when I started.
Did you get to work on any spacey stuff? Did you get to work on some of the cool tech that you were hoping to work on?
It's funny, at first I didn't. And I was like, I was kind of drawn in from that. And then I found out I was going to be on a different project. And I'm like, hey, what's going on? I thought I was going to be able to work on NASA stuff. But I ended up working for a family friendly video streaming company. And it wasn't Netflix or anything like that. It was just like small niche, very niche, family friendly thing. But like it ended up being a really cool opportunity. Now I didn't necessarily like love the provider that we were working for, but being able to work on a video streaming site was very interesting because there's a whole different range of challenges that I had to think about and solve for, both from a UX perspective and from a engineering side. So they were a big AWS house, or probably still are, but so that's where I started to learn about cloud computing and how that fits into the entire engineering ecosystem, but also learning more about in-browser technologies. So like I did a lot of JavaScript work before this, but they were able to use a little bit more modern tools because they were doing kind of client work and had more opportunities for those things. So that's where I started to learn more about React, and was able to really explore interesting things from my perspective.
Can you briefly talk about the challenges that you said you were facing? I'm kind of interested in what those technical challenges were. I'm always, everything today is, I don't have cable anymore, right? Like I watch all my TV on Hulu for live TV, and honestly, that service is amazing, dude. Like it rarely, they have little bugs here and there, but like I don't worry that the game I'm watching is going to shut down, right? And I know the TVs are basically big browsers at the end of the day. So like I'm kind of fascinated with how all that streaming works and the efficiency that has to be there because of the amount of, right? Like if you were sending every single pixel every single time, I probably don't have enough bandwidth to do that all over the planet, right? But kind of, can you talk a little bit about how that works, and then like the challenges that you were facing back in 17, which it's still fairly new in 17, yeah, talk about that.
So the scalability is like the one that's right off the top of my head. Like thinking about the scale of the different network requests that are happening on a video streaming site, and of course we had to deal with scalability from a ThinkGeek side, but the e-commerce perspective. But you're still working with a more traditional website, right, where you have each individual page load. So it's more about the amount of people are hitting each page as opposed to hitting a page and then doing a bunch of other stuff on that page. So one of those things is video streaming, and things that we had to think about. And we didn't actually host the video content. We worked with a different provider that we would grab the video data for, but we had to develop the player around that and all the different analytics around that, and not just analytics from understanding the data perspective, which is a whole new challenge that other parts of my team would tackle, but things that enhance the experience. So for instance, every X amount of seconds we would trigger a tracking beacon so that we can see at what point of the video that they're actually in, so that if they pause, we can get them back to that point when they refresh the page, or so that they can resume. So a lot of features around that experience had those different endpoints that had to be hit, right? And if those endpoints are being hit constantly, like every 10 seconds, every single person watching every single video, right? Like that's a lot of requests. So how can you make sure that that doesn't take down the site? The site was traditionally a Rails site, and it did really well. Like I'm not a huge Rails fan just because the nature of what I do, I think, but like it was working really well for what they had at the time. But they started to take more advantage of the cloud technologies, and at that time serverless functions was really starting to kick off and blossom. So we tried to start moving some of that work into functions so that we could take advantage of the benefits of serverless, like being able to quote infinitely scale some of those things and have a little bit more and reduce the costs of a lot of stuff. So there was a lot of opportunity there for how we could take the challenges that we have with that stack and the amount of traffic we're getting, and how we could alleviate it with some of the new tools.
I like serverless, but there's always this inherent latency to get that job up and running. And so it can't be for anything that's like truly on demand. It's got to be like, can you get to this in N number of seconds, please? And that's fine in life, right? So what kind of stuff were you using the serverless tech for?
So like the tracking beacons, for instance, like that doesn't need to be immediately, like instantly available, right? Because what happens is, say the video hits 5 minutes, so we trigger that beacon and that makes the request, but that beacon request has that timestamp in it, so it doesn't need to like just we don't sync it based off the time it hit the server. Once it hits the server, it adjusts and adds that entry that it was paused at that particular time. So I don't think anything we were doing from our perspective needed to be instantaneous. So I think we were able to take advantage of serverless from that perspective.
I just hate managing. I hate the ops side of things now. I just don't want to
Oh, yeah.
manage anything on the ops side. So serverless, we were using it for some stuff early on. We were using before it was in the cloud, we were using a product from a company called Iron.io. This was before all the clouds decided to add this sort of feature functionality. And I loved it, man. Just how simple was it to just write a piece of code and put it out there and just hit it when you want and not have to worry about infrastructure or, I don't know. I love it.
Moving past the video streaming site, I moved on to another project which was a video streaming, or I'm sorry, I just said video streaming, satellite mapping dashboard. And that was a bigger project where we were able to build it solely on React. We were build it natively serverless. So everything started from those cloud technologies. But because of all that cloud orchestration, like, so we had those big cloud formation templates. We were using, I think, I forget what exactly, we were using Jenkins for running the CI, and I did not enjoy that at all. I tried to stay away from that as much as possible. And I know some people love it. Some people are fantastic at it. But as a front-end guy, I dreaded going into that. And like, I'm the kind of person that likes to be able to figure out little things so that I can be more productive rather than bothering somebody. But even with that, I could figure out little things, but not to throw shade on Jenkins, but there was such poor documentation and little documentation at the time that I had so much trouble trying to figure things out. And on top of that, waiting for things to deploy. So like debugging a CloudFormation template and waiting for it to deploy only to find out it fails and then scales back. Like there was just a lot of little things like that, right? But ultimately, like the fun part of for me was I was able to build a React application from scratch that was able to, we use Leaflet, if you're familiar, to build a mapping interface where after the satellite took the data, we would ingest it into AWS's cloud, and then we were able to make it available via a search interface. I was able to use that to put the imagery on the map itself, which was really cool.
Yeah, it sounds super cool. How long were you at this company?
That one was 3 years as well, I believe. It was right at the around 3 year mark. Yeah.
All right. And you're getting restless again?
Yep. Restless again. At this point in time, because of all that work in mapping, in the back of my head, I was thinking, how can I, if I feel like I'm able to make an impact by building these dashboards for scientists, how can I expand on that? How can I teach that to other people to maybe build mapping applications for other scientists or other people that can ultimately do some more good for the world, right? So I start to write blog posts, and mapping is one of the first things that I started talking about. And from there, like I did talks about it. And then from there, I started to expand into other tools. So how could I teach other tools? Because I just really enjoyed being able to teach other people these things, and people seemed to like and understand how I was explaining it to them. So I just kept kind of pulling at that thread. And that eventually, as I was getting kind of restless, I started to think about different roles that I could take. And developer relations was really becoming more of a thing, where traditionally evangelism has been there for a long time. But at least in the communities that I was in, like developer relations was a different kind of take on it, where it was less about like strict evangelism of the product itself. It was more like, how can we help the developer community? And it just happens that we have this cool tool that can do that, right? But that kind of drew me because of all that learning or teaching that I was doing, and how I could kind of fit in that world.
So what's interesting to me is there is nothing that I've heard in your story to suggest that this would be something you would do or be interested in. So what did I miss in this conversation with you that could have given me some insight that this is where you would end up?
I don't think there was any, like, honestly, it came from that thinking of like, I feel like I'm making an impact. So how can I help others make that impact? And I don't know, like because I started doing that, I enjoyed it. I think I started writing for the company blog first, and then I was writing for Free Code Camp too. And being able to see the impact, like it was like it makes such a like it's a very strong connection to be able to see people like reply thank you or like something, not just from like a, you know, what is it, like making myself feel good about myself because I see a thank you and praise, more so like it helped them get their job done. And that impact, like I was feeling that I could keep multiplying that impact by continuing to pull on that education thread.
At that point now, is this where you find where you are today, Cloudinary?
No. So my first role in developer relations was for a tool called Applitools. They are a visual testing tool. So what they do is, like, if you have your website or mobile app, they'll take screenshots of it and compare it. Now, there's a lot of tools that do that pixel by pixel, which is the big thing, where like if one little change on it, they'll like highlight that. But what they do is they use AI so that maybe if you load one web page and then refresh it, maybe it'll be off by 1 pixel because of, who knows, it's the web. But they'll recognize that it's still the same thing and use AI to kind of align it so that you're still looking at it. And then they won't raise any flags if there weren't any actual issues with it. So it was a really, really awesome product. And I had fun teaching it, but it was in the testing space and I just wasn't super interested in the testing space. I guess I kind of drew out that story really quickly, but I only stayed there for a year before I moved on again, because not because I was getting restless or didn't enjoy the work. I just wasn't as interested in that space for teaching.
Yeah, you didn't have any passion for any of that. Like you, at this point, if we talk about the tech that you're really good at, you're good at the JavaScript framework tech. You're good at cloud. You're good at, the systems that you were building. You were interested in that, the mapping stuff, right? That's kind of where you had a passion. You moved to this company that's kind of not really doing any of that, but it was,
Yeah.
I guess you were like, you know what, I can be a full-time teacher, mentor. I want to take it. It just wasn't.
Like it was the opportunity that was presented. And I don't regret taking it, because I was able to work with somebody called Angie Jones, who's a community leader, fantastic person, great developer relations role model. So I had a lot of great opportunities there. I learned a lot on the job about testing, but yeah, I think, I kind of took that role as a way into that without kind of thinking about the actual space I was getting into, which, hindsight again, but like I don't regret it.
And now, a year later, what happens? You decide, I need to find another gig in some tech I'm passionate about.
Yeah. So funny story about Cloudinary is I was actually talking to them in 2020 about basically the same role that I have now. But because of the pandemic, there was a hiring freeze. And the way they made it sound is like they were pretty confident they were going to hire me at that point. So like here I am hugely bummed that all of a sudden hiring was frozen and I no longer had this opportunity. I thought that was mine. But the time kind of synced up really well for the time that I was kind of wanting to move on from Applitools, where they were looking for somebody to bring on. So that's when I kind of reconnected with the team that I was originally talking with, and where that's kind of how I landed back at Cloudinary and took this role. Now Cloudinary, I don't want to do too much promotion.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second, because I've never heard of Cloudinary, and I don't know why I haven't. So what is the problem that they're trying to solve?
So Cloudinary is all around media, and when I say media, that's like images and videos and audio and stuff, not your news websites, but they try to solve the problems associated with that, and that's everything from asset management all the way to delivery. Where if you're a creative, you can work with their asset management system where you can upload the media, you can kind of like make alterations to it. But then from a delivery side, that's delivering from a high performance CDN, but that's also doing things like automatic optimization, so that one of the things that's the coolest in my opinion and very compelling is you can automatically serve modern formats based off of the browser that's visiting. So what that means is if you're visiting Chrome, which supports like the most modern formats, it's going to give you an AVIF file if that's going to be the most efficient way to serve that file. But if you're in Safari that doesn't support AVIF, it's going to give you WebP, which for that browser is going to be the most efficient. But beyond that, they have things like transformations where you can do dynamic resizing and cropping. Going back to my e-commerce days with ThinkGeek, it's funny because they actually pitched us Cloudinary at the time, which was very compelling for our processes. Ultimately, we didn't have the money for it. But the thing that was awesome about it is the way that our creative team was set up at that time is they would create a ton of different versions for every single image that they would take. So if they took a picture of a model for a particular product, they would take that, they would crop it into all the different dimensions. They would also resize it to all the different dimensions and send that to us. But now if we had Cloudinary, what they could do is they can upload that source image, and us as the developers can resize it on the fly to exactly what we need. So on the product page, if we're showing the big image, we can do exactly the dimensions we need. If it's for the little thumbnail, exactly the dimensions we need. And that's on the fly. So we have complete control over that while.
So the first time you request it, they'll cut it, and then I guess they cache it.
Yep, exactly.
And you're good. They must have some pretty powerful data center. Are they running on Amazon over there? I mean, you need a lot of compute power.
Yeah, they're running on AWS. I don't know as much about the deep technical bits of the product yet. We're not, so I work with the product team technically in my organization, but I don't work on the product. So like right now, a lot of what I've been able to explore are the features, but I do want to try to get deeper into the technology, not just so I can explain things, but just generally out of curiosity, because it is interesting, right? Because that is a whole new challenge that people don't generally think about.
Are they splicing in ads and commercials in the video? I've met some companies that do that for like an ESPN or something.
That's a good question. I think we might have that capability, or we might be getting to that, but it would all be customer controlled. So that's not something that like, I don't think that like we wouldn't provide the ads, for instance. Like we would provide the APIs so that developers can do whatever they want with that.
So remind me again now that we've got like another 7 minutes left here to talk. So remind me again now, how long have you been at Cloudinary, and what's your like your primary role right now?
Sure. So I've been here since November, so it's coming up on a year, but I'm a developer experience engineer. So mainly a lot of the things that I do is like I still do the education. So that includes content creations like articles and videos, but I also work with integration. So how can I find ways to integrate with existing products? So one of them is Netlify, if you're familiar, which is a hosting platform, hosting and deployment. Like there's a lot of things they can do, but ultimately deploy websites out to the web. I created a plugin for that so that we can swap in the images to Cloudinary URLs to take advantage of a lot of the features that we're doing. So how can I build little integrations that aren't going to be officially supported by our SDK team? But also it's taking a lot of this developer community feedback back to the team so that we can incorporate that feedback to ultimately build a better developer experience for the product.
So your role is to interact with the developers who are working on the product, or clients, or both?
Like traditionally it's more of the outside, like not we're not necessarily ingrained in like the sales or the customer conversations, but we're trying to make ourselves available for that because of the experience that we have working with the broader developer community. But more traditionally, we are working with the developer community from like the social channels, and we go to conferences and talk to people and have booths there so that we can have that communication and establish those relationships.
So here's the question I like to ask everyone I meet who's kind of in your role, and regardless of the company that they're in. How are you and how is your company measuring your success?
That's a good question, and we're actually trying to figure that out. There's a lot of companies that do that, I'd say the wrong way, like where they just simply measure, like a traditional marketing way is getting signups, right? Like how can I get signups? The more signups means I'm getting more people and we're being more impactful, right? That's not the case. Like what we try to look at is the long tail aspect of that. So of course we want people to sign up and build an account, but we want people to use it, engage with it, and learn how to use it so that whether their account goes from free tier to paid tier because they've seen that value, or if they become a Cloudinary advocate because they've seen that value and know how awesome it is and how much of a better experience they can have with that, they might advocate to their company, right? Like if I'm working on Element 84 and I become and I'm advocating to them that we should use that on projects, that's kind of where we see the biggest benefit of how we can have success.
See, for me, the answer always, and I'm a business person, so the answer is always, I want to see an increase in revenue. I don't care how you got there, but if the revenue line was X and you've been here for a year and the revenue line is an X plus, then what kind of, right? Like the impact needs to be on revenue or
Totally. And like I said, we're still trying to determine like how we can best measure that in a way that's going to represent the work we do. And we recently got a new VP of developer relations that has a lot of experience, and we're hoping that she can help us out with that. But generally speaking, like the work that we do there's two challenges with it. One, it's more long tail because we're building those relationships and really helping them solve problems. We're not going to see that immediate gain. We're not going to see them immediately sign up for a paid account and then that's going to directly hit the revenue. And also when we go out and do talks, or if we're on Twitter answering questions, like we're not going to see that directly attributed to the work we're doing, right? So like it's more challenging to attribute the work we do and actually see it related to that revenue.
it's a marathon. This isn't like in 3 years, if the revenue hasn't increased, then I would say what's happening on the DevRel side is not working, right? Like I do DevRel for Ardan. Like my job is to be out there, very similar, right? I love helping people. I love educating people. I love giving all the stuff that you're doing. I love, but at the end of the day, if it's not growing revenue, growing clients, growing business, then I'm a cost center.
Totally.
And I have to kind of really rethink what I'm doing at the same time, right? But it's beautiful to be able to do this kind of work that you love and be out there with people and help people. And then the added benefit is the company's also gaining value from that.
Yeah. And like we thoroughly believe that we are adding that value because we see people who are able to make it click when we're helping them through a challenge. Like they can immediately see the benefit that we're trying to help them with, right? So like we do see that in what we're doing. It's just we can't, like it's more challenging to have that in the data and how we can actually have that in the stats.
So we got like 3 minutes left. What conferences are you attending? Like what are the conferences for your business and your tech?
So I don't know when this is going to air, but one that I'm excited about is in November called Jamstack which is a big community that we do work around that I've been a part of for a while. Where I don't know if you've heard of Jamstack, but it started out as playing on like the static sites where the static sites would use decoupled APIs, and that was really the foundation. Now that's something you've probably used. You just might not have never heard the term associated with that kind of architecture. But there's also ImageCon, which Cloudinary, it's a Cloudinary event that I'm excited about. I'm helping out with a workshop and giving a talk there. What else? I'm going to a bunch of conferences. I can't think. I was just at Cascadia JS in Oregon, which was a lot of fun. But there's an abundance of conferences, so I'm sure there's a good chance that people will see me around.
And like the workshop, the next workshop you're doing, what is the workshop about? Is it going to be about on Cloudinary sort of tech, or is it a little more generalized on JavaScript?
Yeah, so because it's a Cloudinary event, it is going to be Cloudinary focused for that one, where we're going to be teaching how to use a Cloudinary in a Next.js stack. So that includes some more of the advanced features. So working with like serverless functions, how can we work with media in a serverless world? But also how can we incorporate some more of the widgets and the different user experience features that we have within that application context.
All right, Colby. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to reach back out to you in 2 years. That's going to be your 3-year anniversary at Cloudinary. And we're going to see if you're restless or not. And anybody listening to Cloudinary should not be panicking, right? If you get 2 years out of anyone, you've done great. 3 years is like, it's just the way the world is right now, right? So this isn't like you panic. This is, I've grown and it's time to do something else. But it will be really interesting because I can feel the excitement that you have about this role in the company. And I think you're going to go 4 years. I think that's going to be, thanks. Put it on Vegas, putting 100 down. Colby's going to be here at least 4 years. I feel it.
I'm feeling good about it too. Like I still have a lot of the same excitement I had when I started, and you can't always say that about every opportunity, but I'm feeling good about where I'm at. I'm having a lot of fun. It's a great product, so yeah, we'll see.
All right, Colby. For anyone who has listened to us today, if if somebody wanted to reach out, say hi, or ask a question, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
You can find me everywhere at Colby Fayock. So Twitter is usually where most people catch me, but really anywhere. That's where you'll find me.
Brilliant. We'll get that in the show notes as well. So, Colby, thank you for spending all this time talking to us about your story and your journey. If you're at any of these conferences, go find Colby and say hi. You can already tell he's a super nice guy. And buy him a beer, okay? He needs a beer. You got it. All right. This is Bill Kennedy and Colby Fayock saying goodbye, and thank you for spending time with us here at the Ardan Labs podcast.